My world imploded when I was 19. Dad, my anchor, my everything was gone. A sudden heart attack, no warnings, just a gaping void where a vibrant, loving man used to be. He and Brenda had been married for about 5 years at that point. I was never her biggest fan. She was one of those women who seemed to collect husbands like expensive handbags, always trading up. Dad, a successful architect, was a definite upgrade from her previous acquisitions. I was his only child, Chloe. Mom died when I was very young, so Dad was my universe. He was a man of quiet strength, immense creativity, and a boundless capacity for love, especially for me. When Brenda entered our lives, I was 14. She was all bright smiles, expensive perfume, and a kind of polished charm that Dad, in his loneliness, found captivating. I tried, for his sake, I truly did. But there was always an edge to her, a transactional feel to her affections that made me uneasy. Dad, despite being an intelligent man, had a blind spot when it came to Brenda's true nature. Or perhaps he just hoped for the best. He did, however, have the foresight to insist on a prenuptial agreement. I only learned the specifics after he died, but it essentially protected his legacy, the house he'd designed and loved, his architectural firm, his main investments, ensuring they would pass to me. Brenda received a generous settlement, enough to live very comfortably, but it wasn't the keys to the kingdom she'd clearly been expecting. The months following Dad's death were a blur of grief so profound it felt like drowning. I was in my second year of a demanding engineering program, a field I'd chosen inspired by Dad's own innovative spirit. Suddenly, calculus and physics felt meaningless. Brenda initially was the picture of the grieving widow. There were hushed tones, pats on my arm, and murmurs of, "We'll get through this together, dear." It felt like a meticulously rehearsed play. The first real indication that the play was over came about a month after the funeral. Dad had a smaller life insurance policy, separate from the main estate, meant to cover immediate expenses. The funeral itself, outstanding bills, and to help me manage until probate was completed. It was a significant sum for a 19-year-old, enough to cover my tuition and living expenses for at least the next year. The funds were deposited into a joint account Dad had set up with Brenda years before, labeled Family Emergencies. The emergency, it turned out, was Brenda's urgent need for a luxury cruise to escape the sorrow and an entirely new wardrobe to go with it. I discovered this when I tried to access funds for my upcoming tuition payment. The balance was shockingly low. Brenda! I found her in the sunroom, flipping through a glossy travel magazine, a fresh manicure glinting as she turned a page. The joint account. It's nearly empty. Where did the insurance money go? She didn't look up. Oh, that. Just a few things that needed settling, Chloe. Your father had some personal debts. And honestly, after all the stress, I needed a little something. Consider it a small token for my years of devotion. Token? My voice trembled. That money was for my university fees. It was to live on. Dad specified. She finally lowered the magazine, her eyes cool and appraising. Darling, your father has left you a veritable fortune. You'll be more than fine. Besides, I'm the one who's truly lost her provider. A girl has to look out for herself. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated selfishness, was a physical blow. The veritable fortune she referred to was tied up in probate. A slow, torturous process. And lawyers were already circling. Brenda continued to live in Dad's house, legally, my house, making my grieving period a living hell. Subtle acts of sabotage became her specialty. My important mail from the university or the estate lawyers would be accidentally lost or delayed. She'd make loud, cheerful phone calls about her upcoming travel plans while I sat trying to study, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Snide comments about my mopey attitude or how I needed to show some resilience like she was became daily occurrences. The university, understandably, wasn't interested in my family drama or Brenda's spending sprees. They had deadlines. I was working a part-time job at a campus coffee shop, but it barely paid for my textbooks and ramen noodles. The weight of it all, the grief, the betrayal, the looming financial crisis, was crushing. In a moment of sheer desperation, I approached Brenda. "Could you possibly lend me the money for tuition?" I hated the pleading note in my voice. "Just until the estate is finalized. I'll pay you back with interest, I swear." She was trying on a new diamond bracelet, admiring it in the hallway mirror. She glanced at my reflection, her expression one of mild distaste. "Lend you money? Chloe, please. You're the heiress now. It's time you learned to manage your assets. This will be a valuable lesson in financial planning for you." "But you took the money," I exclaimed, tears stinging my eyes. "The money Dad specifically set aside for this. I'm going to be kicked out of my program." "Well, perhaps a break from all that tedious studying would do you good," she said with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "You could get a job, learn what real work feels like. Your father always sheltered you too much." The letter from the university arrived a week later. I was officially withdrawn from my engineering program. My dreams, so carefully nurtured by my father and me, shattered. As if to twist the knife further, a significant portion of Dad's stock portfolio, funds I was banking on for my long-term future, nosedived in a market correction. The fortune was rapidly shrinking due to bad advice given to Dad before he died, and now market volatility. The beautiful house Dad built became a symbol of my predicament. An asset on paper. But with crushing property taxes and upkeep I simply couldn't afford. I couldn't breathe under the same roof as Brenda any longer. Her quiet satisfaction at my plight was palpable. I packed a small suitcase with my most essential belongings and left the only home I'd ever known. My friend Maya let me sleep on her dorm room floor for a week. Then another friend, Liam, no relation, just a kind classmate, offered his couch. But student apartments are small, and friendships, no matter how strong, can only bear so much strain. That's how I ended up, 6 months after Dad died, shivering in a biting November rain, outside what was supposed to be my sanctuary. I'd spent the last 3 nights in a 24-hour laundromat, pretending to wait for clothes to dry, surviving on stale donuts and fear. I was at the end of my rope. I knocked on the door, my knuckles smarting from the cold. Brenda opened it, her face a mask of annoyance that quickly shifted to something akin to cold satisfaction as she took in my drenched, pathetic state. My jeans were soaked, my thin jacket offered little protection, and I was visibly trembling. "What is it, Chloe?" Her voice was flat, devoid of any concern. "Brenda, please," I begged, shame burning my cheeks hot despite the cold. "I have nowhere else to go, just for a night or two. Until I can figure something out. It's freezing out here." She looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that stripped away the last of my dignity. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "Chloe," she said, her voice utterly devoid of warmth or pity, "your father is gone. You're a young woman now, not a child. This is your mess to sort out. I have my own life to lead." And then she closed the door. Gently, almost silently. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of finality, of complete and utter abandonment. That was my rock bottom. Alone, disowned, broke, and literally out in the cold. The years that followed were a brutal climb from an abyss. My first shelter was a corner in a noisy, overcrowded women's hostel where I learned to sleep with my meager belongings clutched tight. I took any job I could find, washing dishes in a greasy diner, scrubbing floors in an office building late at night, handing out flyers in freezing weather. Each rejection, each condescending look, each gnawing hunger pang forged a core of steel within me. The shame was a constant companion, but the will to survive, to prove Brenda and the world wrong, burned hotter. During the day, when not working soul-crushing minimum-wage jobs, I practically lived in the public library. It was warm, safe, and filled with the knowledge I craved. I devoured books on coding, software development, business management, and advanced engineering concepts I'd missed from my truncated degree. I taught myself programming languages, built a portfolio of small projects on the library's ancient computers, and took free online courses. One of my library haunts was a small tech hub that offered free Wi-Fi and occasional workshops. It was there I met Sarah, a retired software engineer who volunteered as a mentor. She was sharp, no nonsense, and saw a spark in my desperate eyes and the dog-eared programming manuals I always carried. She didn't offer sympathy, but she did offer guidance, critiquing my code, pushing me to learn more, and eventually, connecting me with some freelance coding gigs. "Chloe," she'd say, over lukewarm coffee, "talent is cheap. Resilience and a willingness to bleed for your goals? That's priceless. Don't ever let them break that in you." I saved every penny. I lived on instant coffee and determination. Those small freelance jobs, designing basic websites, debugging code for tiny startups, were my lifeline. They weren't glamorous, but they were experience. They were a flicker of hope. I poured every spare moment and every spare dollar into developing an idea that had taken root in my mind, a platform to streamline and secure data management for small to medium-sized sustainable energy companies, a niche I'd become passionate about, partly as a tribute to Dad's architectural interest in green design. It took 3 years of relentless work, countless setbacks, and living on the very edge of poverty, but I finally launched Helios Data, my own small company, from a corner of my tiny shared apartment. My first client was a small solar panel installer Sarah knew. I worked 20-hour days, often sleeping on the floor next to my secondhand computer, but the platform worked. It was efficient, secure, and user-friendly. Word began to spread in the tight-knit green tech community. One successful project led to another. Helios Data grew. I hired my first employee, then my second. I focused on innovation and ethical practices, channeling my father's spirit. A decade after Brenda closed that door on me, Helios Data was a multi-million-dollar enterprise, a recognized leader in specialized data solutions for the renewable energy sector. I had built not just a company, but a life of purpose, success, and independence. I'd even established the Arthur Vance Innovators Grant in Dad's name, funding young women entering STEM fields. My office, in a sleek downtown tower, had a panoramic view of the city, a view I'd earned every single day. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, my executive assistant Maria buzzed through on the intercom. "Ms. Vance, there's a Ms. Brenda Sheridan here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but says it's a personal matter of utmost urgency." Brenda. The name still sent a cold shiver down my spine, a ghost from a past I had fought so hard to overcome. 12 years. 12 years without a word, without a whisper. And now she was here. "Send her in, Maria," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the sudden maelstrom inside. I stood, smoothing the lapels of my tailored suit jacket, and walked to the expansive window. When I turned back, Brenda was hesitating in the doorway. The years had taken their toll, and not kindly. The expensive facade was gone, replaced by an air of faded gentility. Her clothes were neat, but bore the telltale signs of being well-worn and perhaps not her first choice. The once perfectly coiffed blonde hair was now a brassy, thinning gray, and the lines around her eyes and mouth spoke of anxiety and disappointment rather than laughter. She clutched an old, oversized handbag as if it were a shield. But her eyes, when they met mine, held that familiar, unsettling glint of calculation, now mingled with a poorly concealed desperation. "Chloe," she began, her voice a little too saccharine, attempting a warmth that felt utterly false. "My goodness, this is quite something. You've done remarkably well for yourself." Her gaze flickered around my office, lingering on the original artwork, the bespoke furniture, the sweeping city views. It was the look of someone assessing value, not admiring achievement. I remained standing, my posture polite but distant. "Brenda, it's been a very long time. What can I do for you?" My tone was even, carefully devoid of the old anger that threatened to surface. Her forced smile wavered. Always so direct. Just like, well, never mind. She shifted her weight. May I sit? It was quite a trek to get here. These old legs, you know. I gestured to one of the plush visitor chairs. She sank into it with a theatrical sigh clearly intended to convey weariness and frailty. Thank you, dear. It's been a rather difficult time for me lately. I can only imagine, I said, still not sitting myself. My office isn't the easiest place to find if you're not expecting to. A subtle reminder of her unannounced arrival. She had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Chloe, she leaned forward, her voice dropping into a confiding, almost pleading tone. I know we had our disagreements in the past. I was so distraught after your father passed. I wasn't myself. I said and did things, terrible things, that I have regretted every single day. Regretted? I repeated, allowing a touch of ice to enter my voice. Which specific actions are at the top of your regret list today, Brenda? Was it draining the account my father left for my education and survival? Or perhaps the part where you slammed the door of his house in my face when I was 19, homeless, and begging for a single night's shelter from the rain? She visibly flinched. The practiced humility slipped, revealing a flash of raw nerves. It wasn't like that, Chloe. You make it sound so deliberate. I was frightened. The money your father left me, his wife, his partner, it was far less than I'd anticipated. There were unexpected debts, complications. I panicked. You panicked your way onto a Mediterranean cruise and into a new sports car, as I recall from the society pages you still managed to get into back then, I countered, my voice flat and devoid of emotion, while I was learning which soup kitchens served the most filling meals. Tears welled in her eyes, tears that looked remarkably similar to the ones she'd produced on demand years ago. Why must you be so harsh, so unforgiving? Life hasn't been a picnic for me either, you know. I've suffered. And this sudden wave of remorse, this urgent need to reconnect after 12 years of complete silence, has been prompted by... I let the question hang heavily in the air between us. She fumbled in her handbag for a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. I need your help, Chloe. There it was, the inevitable punchline. My husband, Richard, my fourth, you wouldn't know him, he passed away recently, and he left. Well, he left a mountain of debt. The creditors have taken everything. The house, the car, my savings. I'm utterly destitute, Chloe. I have nothing left. Nowhere to turn. The story was suitably tragic, if one were inclined to believe it. But with Brenda, belief was a luxury I couldn't afford. So, after abandoning me when I had nothing, you've sought me out now that you perceive yourself to have nothing. And you expect me to do what, exactly? Write you a check? We're family, Chloe, she insisted, her voice rising, a note of her old, familiar entitlement creeping in. Or, we were once. Your father loved me very much. He would never want to see me reduced to this indignity. My father, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone, would be horrified by the way you treated his daughter, his only child. He valued compassion, loyalty, basic human decency, principles you seem to have bypassed entirely. You dare invoke his memory now to me after what you did? I walked around my desk and finally sat, meeting her gaze with unwavering steadiness. Let me tell you about indignity, Brenda. Indignity is huddling in a doorway for warmth. It's going days without a proper meal. It's being made to feel worthless and invisible by someone who should have offered protection. I learned those lessons firsthand, thanks to your tutelage. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, desperation, resentment, perhaps even a flicker of fear. But you overcame it. Look at you. You're successful, wealthy. What's a little financial assistance to you now, to help your poor, aging stepmother? It would be a drop in the bucket for you. I'm not asking for a fortune, Chloe, just a loan. Enough to find a small place, to get back on my feet. A loan? I echoed, a slight mirthless smile touching my lips. The kind of open-ended loan that never gets repaid? The kind of temporary assistance that morphs into a lifelong obligation? No, Brenda. I learned about fiscal responsibility the hard way. You were one of my earliest and harshest teachers, remember? Your mess to sort out. I believe those were your precise words to me. The fabricated tears had vanished. Her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. You're actually enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me squirm. You always were a cold, calculating little thing, even as a girl, so sanctimonious. No, I'm not enjoying it, I said, and it was the truth. There was no pleasure in witnessing her downfall, only a grim, weary sense of a chapter finally, painfully, closing. But I'm also not naive. You made your choices, Brenda. You chose to defraud a grieving child. You chose to abandon family when it suited you. You chose to prioritize your own comfort and desires above all else. And it seems your subsequent choices and partners were equally self-serving and ultimately poor. These are the natural consequences of your actions. It is not my responsibility to shield you from them. She pushed herself up from the chair, her movements jerky with anger. So that's your final word? You'll just turn your back on me, as if I'm nothing more than dirt on your expensive shoes? I'm offering you the same level of consideration and assistance you offered me when our situations were reversed, I replied, calmly. You had an opportunity to be family, to show compassion. You squandered it. As for turning my back, you demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for that maneuver yourself. Her face contorted into an ugly sneer. You sit there in your ivory tower, so high and mighty, but you conveniently forget that you wouldn't have any of this empire if it weren't for your father's money that gave you a start. I actually laughed then, a short, sharp sound, devoid of any humor. My father's money? Are you referring to the funds you did your utmost to ensure I never received? The inheritance that was substantially diminished by your initial theft and subsequent market misfortunes? No, Brenda. I built Helios Data from scratch, with my intellect, with my resilience, with years of relentless work and sacrifice, starting from a deficit you personally engineered. My father gave me a keen mind and a strong moral compass. You, on the other hand, provided a stark, unforgettable lesson in what to avoid becoming. She seemed to wilt, her bravado crumbling. So, you'll offer nothing? You'll just let me... what? End up on the streets? I leaned back, considering her. Despite everything, a vestige of my father's empathy warred with my own bitter experience. I am not responsible for your current predicament, Brenda, I stated. However, I paused. Helios Data has a philanthropic arm. Our foundation assists individuals facing hardship. It provides resources for temporary housing, skills training, and counseling services. It's designed for people who are genuinely committed to rebuilding their lives. I can have Maria give you their contact details. They evaluate each case based on need and merit. Your past connection to my family will afford you no special treatment. In fact, they won't even be aware of it. It is a hand up, not a handout. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. You'd refer me to a charity? Like some common vagrant? The indignation in her voice was almost comical. It's a more compassionate offer than the one you extended to me, I pointed out. The choice is yours. She stared at me for a long, silent moment, her mind clearly whirring, assessing her limited options. Then, a sly, cunning expression settled on her features. You know, Chloe, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. Your dear father. He wasn't a saint, you know. He had a few indiscretions. Certain dealings and associations he wouldn't have wanted publicized. Things that could prove rather embarrassing for his carefully cultivated legacy. And, by extension, for you and the pristine image of Helios Data. A chill traced its way down my spine. Blackmail. This was her endgame. "Are you attempting to threaten me, Brenda?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft, each word precise. A small, unpleasant smile touched her lips. "Not threatening, dear, merely suggesting. A more private arrangement could be mutually advantageous. Keep things within the family, so to speak. Help out an old stepmother in her time of need, and ensure your father's impeccable reputation remains just that, impeccable." A wave of pure, cold fury washed through me, but I suppressed it, replacing it with an icy resolve. My father was a good and honorable man. He was human, and like all humans, he may have had flaws, but he lived his life with integrity. Whatever indiscretions you imagine you can leverage are undoubtedly your own malicious fabrications or gross distortions. And even if they weren't, resorting to blackmail is an exceedingly foolish path for you to take. I pressed the intercom button. "Maria, could you come in for a moment, please?" Brenda looked momentarily startled, her composure faltering. Maria, my unflappable and highly competent assistant, entered discreetly. "Yes, Ms. Vance?" "Maria," I said, my gaze fixed on Brenda. "Please escort Ms. Sheridan from the premises. Kindly make a note that she is not to be granted access to any Helios data facility or to contact any company personnel henceforth. Should she attempt to do so, we will consider it harassment and inform the relevant authorities. Also, please ensure that our security department archives the CCTV footage from the lobby and this corridor for the past hour." Brenda's face drained of color, then flushed a blotchy, furious red. "You wouldn't! I'll go to the press. I'll tell them everything." "Tell them what, Brenda?" I interrupted, rising to my feet. "That your stepdaughter, whom you defrauded and callously abandoned, refused to be blackmailed by you over a decade later? Feel free. Helios Data's reputation is built on transparency and solid ethical foundations, not on the suppression of fictitious scandals. Your reputation, however—" I let the unspoken words hang in the air. Maria, ever the professional, stepped forward. "Ms. Sheridan, if you'll please come with me." Brenda shot me a final look, her eyes blazing with a mixture of impotent rage and malice. "You'll live to regret this, Chloe. This isn't over." Then she turned sharply and allowed Maria to usher her out, her parting threats dissolving into angry mutters as she disappeared down the corridor. When the door clicked shut, I let out a long, shaky breath. The anger remained, but it was now overlaid with a profound sense of exhaustion, and despite my brave words, a tiny seed of doubt lingered. What if she wasn't bluffing? Dad had always been a private man. That evening, as I was trying to unwind, my phone rang. It was Frank Donahue, a discreet private investigator I'd used on rare occasions for sensitive corporate matters. Years ago, driven by a need to understand the woman who had so profoundly impacted my early life, I'd commissioned a comprehensive background check on Brenda. Frank had a knack for uncovering hidden truths, and he occasionally updated me if anything significant related to her crossed his desk via his various informants and databases. He was calling because an alert had just been triggered. Brenda Sheridan, or Brenda Miller, her maiden name, which she'd apparently reverted to, was named in ongoing legal proceedings. "Chloe," Frank's gravelly voice came down the line, "thought this might interest you. Your stepmother, Brenda Miller, has just been formally implicated as a co-conspirator in a series of investment fraud schemes targeting elderly individuals. Her latest husband, Richard, the one who supposedly died leaving her in debt? Turns out he was the ringleader. He faked his death and fled the country with the bulk of their illicit gains when the authorities started closing in, leaving Brenda to face the fallout. The mountain of debt she mentioned was likely the restitution claims from their victims. She's been trying to cut a deal by offering information, but it seems the secrets she possesses aren't compelling enough to get her off the hook. Suddenly, her desperate visit, her carefully crafted sob story, her veiled threats, it all coalesced into a single, damning picture. She wasn't just broke, she was on the verge of indictment, possibly facing serious prison time. Her threats about Dad's secrets were almost certainly a desperate gambit, a last-ditch effort to see if I had any information she could use, or to intimidate me into providing her with funds to disappear or pay for a top-tier lawyer. She wasn't just looking for a handout, she was looking for an escape route. The embarrassing secrets about my father she alluded to, I asked Frank, my voice tight. Was there any substance to that? Pure smoke and mirrors from what my contacts indicate, Frank replied. Standard operating procedure for con artists of her ilk when they're cornered. She was probing, hoping to unearth something, anything, to use as leverage. If anything, the authorities found evidence that she had a long history of predatory behavior, with your father being one of her earlier, more legitimate targets before she graduated to outright criminal enterprises with Richard's crew. She was likely more worried about what you might know about her past activities that could worsen her current legal jeopardy. The relief was palpable, washing over me in a cleansing wave, swiftly followed by a fresh surge of disgust at her audacity. This new information didn't alter the outcome of our confrontation. I would never have succumbed to blackmail, but it completely extinguished that lingering flicker of doubt, reaffirming the rightness of my stance. My offer of foundation assistance, which she had scoffed at, now seemed almost laughably magnanimous in light of her true circumstances. A week passed. Then, a small, plain envelope, addressed in a spidery, vaguely familiar hand, arrived at my office, having been forwarded from my home. No return address. I recognized Brenda's writing. My first instinct was to toss it into the shredder unopened, but a stubborn need for absolute closure, for the final punctuation mark on this sordid chapter of my life, made me slide my letter opener beneath the flap. Inside there was no letter, only a single brittle pressed flower, a faded orange marigold, taped to a square of cheap, flimsy cardstock. Beneath it, scrawled in the same unsteady handwriting, were 3 words: "He loved these." My father had indeed loved marigolds. Our garden had been full of their cheerful orange and yellow blooms every summer. As a young girl, I'd often pick him little bouquets. And yes, in those early, hopeful days after she married Dad, I had occasionally picked them for Brenda, too, in a childish attempt to win her affection, to bridge the gap I always felt between us. Was this a final, pathetic attempt at emotional manipulation? A desperate, last-gasp appeal to a shared memory, however tainted? Or, and this thought was almost too bizarre to contemplate, was it a flicker of some deeply buried, almost unrecognizable human remorse from a woman facing the abyss? I stared at the fragile, faded flower for a long time. It was a relic of a past that had undeniably shaped me, a symbol of pain and betrayal. But it no longer held any power. Its ability to wound had withered along with its petals. I rose, walked to the heavy-duty shredder in the corner of my office, the one reserved for the most sensitive and obsolete documents. I fed the small square of cardstock into the machine. The motor word, and the marigold, along with her 3 carefully chosen words, was instantly transformed into a cascade of meaningless, confetti-like strips. Some memories, some individuals, don't deserve a place in the archives of one's life. Some ghosts need to be decisively laid to rest, not just closed, behind a door, but utterly and completely expunged. Brenda, and the long shadow she had cast over a part of my existence, was one of them. My success was my own, forged in fires she had helped to kindle. My peace of mind was a hard-won, jealously guarded treasure. And my future, I resolved, would be unburdened by her. The following morning, Sarah, my early mentor, and now a cherished friend and active board member of the Arthur Vance Innovators Grant, dropped by my office. We were reviewing the applications for the latest round of grants, her sharp eyes scanning a particularly promising proposal from a young woman developing AI for sustainable agriculture. "You seem lighter today, Chloe," Sarah observed, peering at me over the rim of her glasses, a knowing smile playing on her lips. I returned her smile, a genuine, unclouded expression of contentment. "I am, Sarah. Just finished clearing out some very old, very unnecessary clutter." She nodded, her smile widening. "Excellent. Clutter is the enemy of progress. Now, about this young woman's algorithm. And just like that, we were immersed again in the work that mattered, building, creating, empowering, looking forward. That, I knew with absolute certainty, was the most fitting way to honor my father's true legacy. Not by lingering on the Brendas of the world, but by actively, joyfully, and relentlessly continuing to build a better one.